Working Cows Podcast, episode 308. This episode is brought to you by Understanding Ag.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals Studios. Very excited to be joined once again today by Fernando Falomir. I first talked to Fernando all the way back on episode 8, so it's exactly 300 episodes since Fernando and I had our first conversation, and so I'm excited to talk to him and talk about how things have changed since our first conversation and how he has started some new things, especially with Understanding Ag, coming on as an instructor and a facilitator with them and doing some of the work that he's doing down there. And so really excited to welcome back again after 300 episodes, Fernando Falomir. Thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thank you, Clay. It's nice to be back 300 episodes later.
Yeah, as I've said multiple times, and I think probably 3, 4, 5 regenerative agriculture, cow-focused podcasts have launched since I started saying this, but here you are probably the prime example of the fact that we need more, since it's taken me 300 episodes to get back around to you. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you again, and to kind of pick up the conversation maybe a little bit where we left off and just kind of introduce people to your ranch again for the first time as far as what kind of environment you are in, where you're at in the world, and kind of some of the things that you face there from an environment perspective.
Sure thing. Well, I'm located in the Chihuahua Desert, which is just outside of Chihuahua, south of Presidio, by the border. We're in a very brittle environment, low rainfall. Usually we get our rains in the late summer, and it all comes in just in 1 or 2 months. And that's pretty much it historically. The rest of the year is pretty dry. It's not unusual to go 8 or 10 months without a single drop of rain. Our average rainfall, it's supposed to be 10 inches. Unfortunately, I cannot say that I see that consistently. Usually it's a whole lot less. If we get between 6 to 8 inches of rain, we're extremely happy and really glad to see the results at our place. So, especially since we started regenerating a ranch in 2004. We're going for more than 20 years since we went down the regenerative process. And really, we see that with less moisture, we can keep up grass productivity, even during times of drought. Since we spoke last, we haven't changed much of our grazing management, but we have changed in the way we address the principles, because we always spoke about being flexible and following nature. And since we spoke last, well, now I work with Understanding Ag and Mr. Gabe Brown, Shane Yu, Alan Williams. They're all amazing people, and we have an amazing team in Understanding Ag. And we share the same values. This was amazing that's what hit us off, is the belief that the regenerative principles are universal. And now, as a consultant, I've had the opportunity to practice the same principles all over the United States, Mexico, and other parts of America with good success. The grasses changes, the climate changes, but the principles remain the same. And that's what struck me the most.
Yeah, no, that's real good. I think that word principles, I think all of the 6, the 3, the 4, the 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and the 4 ecosystem processes, I think they're all well named, because what we call things matters. And when you say it's a principle, that means that it applies everywhere, that you can take this and you can implement it as a principal on your ranch, and you can look after these things, and they will start to bear fruit, positive fruit on your place. And I think that when we first talked 300 episodes ago now, that you were talking about your ranch in thirds, that you had started working on a third of the ranch as far as improving that, and you were working on the next third, and then in the future you'd get to the whole place. Do I remember that right?
Yes, you're correct. So we had a lower bottom of our ranch is a bit more productive. We have deeper soils. We got to a point now that we slowed down erosion quite significantly. So now water is starting to flow differently. So instead of having gullies, we have vast areas that get irrigated whenever it rains. And the amount of carbon that we put on to the soil really expands our growing season quite significantly. In that regards, we continue to see great improvements, even after a 3-year drought that we just went through. We always put emphasis on taking care of the land and cooling animals at the right time, because at the end of the day, we are grass farmers, even though we're ranchers, and that hurts us to say it. We're ranch farmers. But we should always take care of the land, and this just proved that it holds true, because many of you had a tough time last year, and hopefully you got in some spring moisture, but you will realize that it doesn't rain grass. The management decisions and how you ended last year will significantly impact this year's growing cycle. So focusing on your more productive areas pays off when you give them preference in recovery, as well as in grazing management, to keep them more active when we have to, especially in the desert. Here we have a very coarse grasses. So once they get past the optimum point, they do become very unpalatable. The other third of the ranch was and still is very eroded. We've seen significant changes. We're still see mostly annual dominated species. So we're following the succession of species, where first we saw a lot of brush encroachment, mesquite coming in. Now a lot of the mesquite has been dying off just by changes in the soil biology, changes in the humidity and the soil properties themselves, and also by insects, biodiversity of insects in the place. Since we had a lot of mesquite encroachment, we also saw new species of beetles coming in that would eat around the mesquite and dry off the new shoots where you grow the mesquite vines. So now this season we're left without mesquite vines, which is the first in 20 years. I'm freaking out, Clay. Nature threw a curveball on me. But that's how it is. You cannot control nature. But it shows that it's self-regulating. So as those areas keep improving, well, we have these biocontrols regulating some of the brush encroachment that we saw in the past when things were pretty degraded.
And the only thing that you changed, there was management. Is that correct?
Yes, we continue with management, just focusing on leaving grass behind, on keeping the soil covered, and giving our pastures ample recovery time. So we give sufficient recovery for grass to establish before we come back again with the cows. And as the soil improves, well, so does the species diversity that we see in those areas. Our more higher elevation areas where we have a lot of rock, we also see a lot of species diversity coming in. We have some cool season grasses starting to show up here in the desert. Not too many, but I also see some native species starting to come back that we haven't seen in over 50 years, such as some of the blue grammas, here is a bit more brittle and more dry for blue grama to establish. So if you start seeing that, that's a good indicator species.
When does your moisture usually come? Is it in the spring? Do you usually get spring moisture that sets you up, or is it kind of that monsoonal moisture that comes in some places, or how does your moisture usually come?
I would say 90% of it comes in the fall as a monsoon. Usually it all comes within 30 or 45 days, and then it shuts off for the entire year. We won't see a single drop in 8 or 10 months. That's very typical.
But you're able to, because of that, those species are able to get by basically, or those species remain decent, palatable, and nutritious after that. Is that true in your context? I know it is in much of the Western United States. Is it true in your context?
It really depends on the grass species. If you have your annual grasses, those will hold a little bit better during the growing season. But your perennial grasses, some of the natives, they can become very, very coarse, very low palatable towards the end. And then you'll have a hard time the rest of the year managing those grasses, especially if you don't supplement. Really, the problem that we see there is, well, what's the monsoon rains, right? What is the monsoon? Clay is supposed to be consistent, right? Reliable.
And the monsoon is those fall moisture, right?
Yeah. Well, monsoon, it should be seasonal. It should be reliable. And quite frankly, in the past 10 years, we have not seen the Gulf behaving normally as it should. And that makes grass management even more difficult, and greater importance towards soil health should be given. But by promoting soil health, even the unlikelihood of having reliable moisture, it allows the grass to behave quite well if you have those root systems established. I think that is key in brittle environments and everywhere. I'm sure Gabe can attest to this, that the deeper and the healthier your root system also protects you for extreme cold, as it does for us during extreme heat. It's all about keeping the ground cover and the plants given a chance to be healthy to perform when the conditions do arrive. So we have to manage our grasses differently depending on the species that we have and what our resource concerns should be. Now, for us in the desert, the greatest resource concern is carbon and keeping the soil covered. So now, coming from a drought for many producers, I think they're going to see that first big issue is that their grasses are not going to be behaving as they normally should after going through last year's drought. So this should be important for them to analyze what is it that they're going to be achieving this season in regards to that slow growth that is expected. And well, we urge our clients to focus on the 6 principles to cover the soil and keep those healthy plant roots growing. Another thing that we haven't done much since we talked last at our place, Clay, is investing in water infrastructure. And we invested a great deal amount initially to divide 15,000 acres, but we still have a lot of areas where our distance to water is fairly large. We have somewhere between 1.5 miles to 2.5 miles distance from water to grazing. And that's something that has held us back in the rate of growth that we were looking for. So we strongly advise our clients that the biggest and most significant investment they can do at their places is developing water infrastructure. Even last year, most of our clients, their problems were due to water availability and reliance. Some of the folks that relied on natural sources, for the first time, they went dry and they had to make tough choices just because of water alone. Now, the reason why we should focus the most is in water infrastructure is what will allow us to do the most effective grazing to our landscape. It's a lot cheaper to become our land more productive per square yard, if you want to call it, than it is to buy a whole new ranch. So if we focus on productivity and increasing the carrying capacity, then we can save a whole lot more than trying to buy a second ranch. And you put it in those terms, then you realize that water infrastructure investment is not as bad as initially sounds when we quote the 30 miles of pipe that we need. Yeah, the cost of pipe, we already thought was pretty high a couple of years back. Now we think that it's ridiculous, but I think it will get a lot more expensive as time goes on. I think that never changes. It always is expensive. We need to put numbers onto what is more expensive. Stagnating our business potential and not meeting it to its full capacity because of fear of an investment, or keeping along how we are and not seeing any progress. I think we can all agree that making our land more productive is in our priority list. And when it comes to grazing, that's what makes the most sense, is making more efficient in our grazing operation. By reducing the distance to water, we can be more effective in how we utilize our grass and lower our cattle to full-time employee ratio and lowering our overheads and increasing our profit margin altogether.
One of the things I notice when I'm out and about and I'm riding on other ranches is how good the pastures can look when you're a long ways from the water point in our neighborhood anyways. But then how much concentration you get right around the water. And I'm not talking like right within feet of the water. I'm talking within a quarter of a mile of the water. You will find, more heavily grazed. And that's kind of back to that idea that we talk about of overgrazing and undergrazing happening in the same pasture, because the water concentration or the water distribution isn't what it should be. And so I think that if we can get those cattle farther out to the edges of those places, because there's water there and they don't have to walk as far to it and they don't have to spend as long in that one spot, then we can get greater distribution, greater usage of our ranch. And it goes back to that whole thing of being able to buy, another ranch or another portion of another ranch, at least with the water infrastructure development. So can you talk to me a little bit about some of the lessons that you learned in the water infrastructure development and some of the things that you've learned as a consultant in helping other people develop water infrastructure on their ranch?
Yes, definitely. The most important is it's having a reliable water source. I think you need to start with the basic and is make sure that what you have will work even during the worst times of a drought. So a lot of wells are going dry or water tables may have been lower now than before. And there's always a risk of running out of water, and it will happen during that drought, during the worst time of the month when you're about to go on vacations, usually. That's when you see this kind of problems. But having a reliable water source, I think, is critical. So having that well that you can rely on, investing in solar equipment. Most solar installs that I've done and work with most of my clients and help them set up, they're investments that pay themselves within a year or a year and a half after install. Just the advancements in technology allow for really cool things to work with some of these engines and having a variable frequency drives to control the speed and the startup amperage that you use. It makes for setting up whatever you need that you set up possible. And there's a budget for everyone to do it at all levels. Even if it's a simple setup used with spraying equipment, all the way to deep wells and agricultural wells going fully on solar, which are a significant investment, but they pay themselves. The second will be distribution. If you can possibly set up a water system that is gravity fed, where you just put them to a high location and it comes down by gravity with sufficient pressure to allow for a portable water trough or to be used throughout the property, I think it's the wisest way to invest in water infrastructure, because gravity fed systems are at low cost. They match well with solar applications. So if you're expecting to have a couple of cloudy days, you just have a large enough water reserve in tanks distributed throughout the ranch, where even if you have an emergency, you can keep sufficient water stored until you can fix the problem. And then it's just low maintenance, because it's working usually at lower pressures if you design it correctly. A second design option is pressurized water systems. These work great for instances where you want to have more intensive grazing or operations, or where the water requirement is a bit more substantial, and you need an on-demand system to provide the flow that you need to meet the needs for your herd. The benefits of those systems is minimize permanent infrastructure, because the line is pressurized. You usually can put more flow through that water pressure, to that water pipe diameter. And you can attach a portable water trough as well throughout the property. I see that in terms of infrastructure, everything is moving more to portable water drink sources. The biggest drawing factor for that is just installation costs of permanent features, as well as the reliability of working water troughs in tough weather conditions. So you can have a hybrid type of system where you have your winter water points, but the rest of the summer you can have more shallow lines pressurized that allow you to have that grazing distribution throughout the property a lot better than conventional large reservoirs that limit you and force you to do lanes and other type of pasture setups that are not as efficient per se.
You're describing my water infrastructure, Fernando. When I started out, I just bought enough black plastic pipe, or poly pipe, I guess technically, to stretch out and water from one hydrant. That's all I had on that place. And so we were moving the line and the tank together until it couldn't reach, and then we just watered back to that point and kept moving them away from it. And then we've kind of been in the same boat, been in a drought for a couple of years, and so we put in some permanent buried line and some water, some winter water points. But each of those water points is one that you can temporarily tap into from inside the tank. And then we took that original line that we had and we run it from those water points, those permanent water points, out to other places, so that we don't have to move anything but the tank itself. And that's just a small poly tank that you can throw in the back of a side-by-side and move to the next place. So, that's kind of how we set ours up, is to get better distribution, but mostly our issue, or what we were trying to reduce, is the labor, and get that water, the line that's laying on top of the water, under some grass so that it's shaded, so it doesn't get quite so hot, because it would get so hot when it was laying out there exposed to the sunlight that you couldn't put your hand in the water tank. And so that's another thing that we were trying to deal with. And so, I've seen it work on my place.
Yes, a setup similar to that, I think it's it was going to be the most flexible in terms of management, because at the end of the day, we like to set up our water and fencing infrastructure to minimize overheads, especially labor, and that can really make all the difference if we do full-time ranching 3 hours a day, or we have to spend all day cussing at everything because it's not working.
Yeah. And I'm supposed to
having a sound water infrastructure plan and design will make your life easier, and your grazing will be even better because you'll start focusing on that instead of the water situation.
I'm supposed to leave on vacation. Actually, I think when this releases, I might be on vacation. So I'm supposed to leave on vacation while I've got some yearlings there that are grazing. And so I'm hoping that we've got our water infrastructure vacation proofed so that we can go.
Yes.
But we'll have somebody there looking after
yes.
things. So they know what to do in case of an emergency. But anyways, yeah. Can you talk to me a little bit more about the brittle environments? I've talked to Alan Williams a number of times, and his context is always very foreign to me. I feel like I understand your context a little bit better, although I'm not exactly where you are, but I understand the brittle environment a little bit better than I do Alan's environment in Alabama, but I don't know that everybody understands that brittle environment. So could you tell me a little bit about what you mean when you say brittle environment?
The brittleness scale is just how infrequent or how unreliable your moisture distribution is, or your humidity distribution. With the more unpredictable and most reliable, well, the more brittle your environment is. What I've seen is these brittle environments, they're very forgiving if you give them a chance. And the biggest handicap is just the lack of carbon in the soil. You cannot grow grass without carbon, and you cannot have carbon without grass. It's kind of like the chicken or the egg dilemma. What came first? And that's the biggest challenge for most producers down here is how do you get something going to generate enough biomass to start working on the 6 principles of health. So tying it into infrastructure is as you improve the grazing distribution, your cattle will also start behaving slightly different. And in our variable environment, it's all about the effect of the cattle in the landscape that matters. And we can generate that in two options. Either we can force them by fencing, or we can work on our stockmanship. Now, personally, I think burial environments could use a little bit of both. And this is where good water infrastructure and fencing planning comes into play, where if you set it up so that your cattle movements make sense and you have your water flow capacity to be in a point where your entire herd can travel as a group towards water, then you really start reducing the stress in those animals. And stress is a powerful thing for the health of our animals. It's the number one leading issue to diseases, to have a weaker immune system function. It's definitely the number one driver for loss of animal performance. And we have a direct say on that stress. Our animals, they need food, water, and shelter. I like to believe that as good managers, we can give the food and the water and the shelter quite satisfactorily for our environment. And if you remove the stress from the management aspect of your animals, you'll see that they start behaving more normal, like I like to call them, like real cows. They start wanting to behave as a herd. They want to go to water together. They go out in bed together. And it's the effect of those hoofprints working as a group that will determine how you get started in these situations, in this brittle environment, because there won't be necessarily enough carbons to sustain the animals for a long enough time to generate the animal impact that you need in the first place. I think stockmanship is a skill that we all can definitely improve upon. Even as an expert, I don't see myself as an expert, but I know good enough about stockmanship handling skills that I can run this entire place by myself and feel confident and be stress-free doing it. And I think all producers, if they work on that, they can see all the benefits of the principles and the integration of the animals to let them do the work that we want them to do, which is restore the landscape.
So by stockmanship, are you mostly referring to the ideas of Bud Williams and handling cattle in that kind of a way, and that sets them up to want to act like a herd? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, it's a bit of Bud Williams, and it's instinctive migratory grazing. It's the idea that if you remove the stress of your animals, they'll want to revert back into being grazing animals. And it's a potential that we hardly even explore as most producers. I've seen great benefits in tapping into that potential, and it's just another tool in my bag on how to restore these vast landscapes with limited resources. I think everyone will benefit greatly from stockmanship. It'll make you way more effective in your time. You can start seeing animal performance improve. So as your animals behave as a group, they will start also grazing with the same intensity as you would in an intensive grazing situation. You can start seeing your animals pick on other nutrition available. So we get carried around with the idea that cows only eat grass, but if you have biodiversity built into your pastures and you have different grass species and brush and weeds and trees, the animals will select their diet that they need so that they become healthy. And that also affects their immune function and their hormonal balance. And it's all tied up into the behavior of those animals. So it's important, I think, to get your animals to be in the right frame of mind, as well as your management and the people working with you to be consistent enough so that you can utilize this potential. I don't know, maybe it's too complicated for some people, but I find it that it's extremely simple. It's just as simple as the 6 principles of soil health. Stockmanship is all about patience. It's about being concise. It's about your presence around the cows. It's about leading from the front and becoming a herd leader rather than trying to drive them and push them. And if you get these cows to the point where they actually accept you and they like you, management cows is the least of my problems, Clay. Usually people are more difficult to handle.
Yeah, for sure. Would you talk, or would you ever consider, or have you brought in outside carbon? So like I've got this place on my ranch was hayed every year before I got there, I'm sure, or at least every year that they actually used the haying equipment when it wasn't a drought. And that place has been very slow to recover. Now, we've been in a similar situation to you where we've been in about a 3-year drought. We've had 2 pretty good springs the last 2 years that have really got us started right. But that place has been very slow to recover. And I've done a little bit of bale grazing on that part that's been slow to recover. And I can see where I've bale grazed that those areas are the first to green up. The plants are taller, darker green, and they stay green longer. So have you brought in outside carbon ever, or is that something that you would be willing to try or do in certain scenarios on your place?
On my place particularly, no, I do not bring outside carbon or other sources, I don't buy seed, I don't buy fertilizer. Just for the simple fact that it's an economics of scale. How many hay bales would I need to get the result that I need or that I want in such a degraded landscape? I mean, you probably could make a walk-in feedlot with portable fencing and feed some of these animals a little bit to increase the amount of carbon and do it in a manner that won't go broke. But I just find it a lot easier letting nature do its thing, letting the cows do their thing. In the brittle environments, it's all about patience. But what I've seen in my consulting is that, yeah, you can accelerate it if you bring that carbon outside when you do bale grazing, for example. It's very effective. It's very successful. I've done it numerous times in irrigated prairies and in smaller scale operations. It's where they were already going to feed that hay. It's a no-brainer. So it all comes back to the scale of your operation and your context.
Right. Whereas if you're Enrique Guerrero and you're being paid to regenerate mine land, that's another thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That was the goal, and we're being paid to use the cows as a tool to regenerate this mine land. We can bring in the outside carbon and get it started faster. So for you, it simply comes down to we're going to keep them here for a shorter duration of time, and we're going to stay away longer because of our water infrastructure, so that land has more time to grow carbon, and that carbon ends up back on the soil and eventually gets incorporated down into the soil. Is that how you're thinking about it?
Yes, that's how I go about it. So for a lot of people coming out from the drought, they will want to hay a lot of their fields. And I'm not sure if most places will have the healthy root structure to be able to do that. I think trying to keep the cows away from feed as much as possible, it's one of the biggest profit drivers there are in what we have direct effect on. So try to think of ways of how your water infrastructure, or by doing fencing, you can increase the recovery of your pastures during the summer so that you can produce the most hay that you can and simply stockpiling it. Doing a stockpile offers some great advantages. It allows to build biodiversity on your soil. You will get that extra carbon that you needed so that when you come and graze it in the fall or during the winter, you can increase the amount of residue you leave behind. And if it helps you increase your grazing season, even better. You just save a lot of money.
Yeah. So tell me about how profitable adaptive grazing is for you and some of the difference that it makes in your bottom line.
Well, it allows me to be a very cost-effective producer. I only have one full-time employee. We're managing our own cow-calf operation. And this is something that has changed from the last time we spoke. In building biodiversity, we also have to build biodiversity in our business, not just in our soil and in our plant species. And I took the same principles and applied it in my economic model on how can I diversify as much as I can as a business, and started integrating running stockers, a stocker operation, as well as a custom grazing operation. And that helped me mitigate the risk that it's inherently high in brittle environments. So one of the biggest mistakes that I've done is I always wanted to grow or reach a certain number of head, because I figured that would be the amount of head that I needed to be profitable or have a nice chunk of change at the end of the year. But the problem is that every time I tried to do that in a single enterprise, which was my cow-calf, by the time I got to that point, the next drought is already in sight, and I had to destock. So every time I try to get there, so I had to create more diversity in how I ran my business. And adding stockers and custom grazing definitely allowed me to to take better grazing management decisions. So I lowered the amount of head that I had on cow calf. And my custom grazing operation really allows for cash flow, which is what was hurting us the most, I believe. And now I can focus on selecting the best animals with epigenetics that are fit for the environment. That allows me to run my low input cow calf operation, which is without any supplements, fertilizers, or chemicals throughout the land year round. So how profitable is adaptive grazing? It's extremely profitable. You can lower your operating costs, you can increase your production potential, and you can have very healthy animals that can end up being a superior product than you will find in any grocery store. So there's a lot of potential in adaptive grazing. It's how we apply it and how we want to see these principles and tie it together as a business that makes all the difference.
And stockers are animals that you own but don't intend to own long term. Is that how you're using that term?
Yeah, that's correct. So how I use those animals, if I meet my average rainfall, they'll stay for another grazing period. That would be either 6 months or a full year additional. And my custom grazing animals, well, those are either by 6 month contracts or a year as well. So those are more moisture dependent. At the end of the year, I evaluate in September and decide how many of those I want to run. And that really lowers our operating risk.
And so the first ones to go are the custom grazers and then the stockers. And then since you've started doing this, have you had to cut into the cow herd? I mean, since the initial, we're going to run fewer cows, have you made it down to the cow herd as far as sending away animals?
Yes. So now I select the ones that are performing and have the phenotype that I'm looking for. So now I can select more critically to be able to have a marketable product that can possibly bring me a few dollars more at the end. So now we're starting to work in developing our own herd that is marketable and more desirable. Yes.
And so was that the process that you went through as we made a big initial cut in the cow herd, and then we're bringing in the stockers and the custom grazers? Has that change kept you from having to destock the actual cow herd, the cow calf herd, in the drought?
Yes. I can keep on my entire cow calf and not have to touch and if we get hit by a drought.
Can you tell me what a drought means in the Chihuahuan Desert? Did you miss one or two of those monsoon year, like the whole year of rain, or what did it look like?
Well, y'all call it drought. I just call it part of grazing in the desert. It's just more likely that it won't rain than when it rains. Maybe when it rains, it's just the odd year. Usually a drought will be anything that if we receive between 4 to 6 inches, I would say that we start getting worried. Once we start getting below 6 inches of rain, the only thing that we can produce in this environment is our perennial grasses, which is the most important factor when it comes to our grazing management decisions, is focusing on our perennial base, because they will be the ones more resilient to those kind of situations. Because a large portion of our ranch is still on that transitioning phase from pioneer species going into perennials. I think the matching our production with our business model was a smart decision. So until we start seeing that our more degraded pastures are becoming fully perennial, then the ratio of our business model on cow calf stockers and custom grazing will also be shifting along with those changes. But now I do not feel as pressured about it, because I'm generating a more resilient business model and management scheme.
Right. And those perennial grasses are more resilient, meaning that they are palatable longer and more nutritious for longer periods of time. Is that right?
Yes, and they require a whole lot less moisture to stay productive.
Yeah.
So once we get to a serious drought, so that was a moderate drought, sorry. A serious drought will be getting only an inch of rain or two. And we had times that we only received that for 2 or 3 years in a row. And that's when things get pretty bad.
And how did you respond to that? What was your management decisions?
All right. So I have my pastures. I like to divide them by level of productivity. And I divide them based upon the resource concern that I need to address in each of those areas, depending on where I am located at the ranch. When you guys start getting to really low rainfall situations, you have to make every inch of your ranch available for grazing. This is where water infrastructure is key. If you cannot utilize every section of your land effectively, it's going to hurt you even more so during times of drought, because you need to expand your rotation as much as you can so that you give it the whole season, the whole rainy season, a chance for your pastures to recover. Now, notice that during that extremely low rainfall, only your native grass species are going to be able to perform, and only your perennial native grass species. But that 2 inches of rain, 3 inches, is enough for a good perennial grass to want to go to seed. You just need to not hurt its root system and have the plant ready to be able to photosynthesize. So that plant needs to be also ready to grow when the time is right. This is where a lot of people get confused on what's overgrazing, and it has all to do about the timing of the grazing of those plants, and it's about spending too much time on your pastures or coming back too soon. So when we get to those severe droughts, some of our pastures might need 1.5 years, up to 2 years of rest to fully recover. So that's when having a drought plan is essential.
Yep, and it's not overgrazing until you come back too soon. I mean, yes, we can take too much, but if we let that plant, or if we let that area recover, if we don't come back too soon, we really haven't overgrazed it. Would you agree with that?
Yes, if you left the ground covered, if you left some residual grass standing, and your grass was ready to be grazed when the time you went in, it's okay if you take a little bit more, as long as you're keeping your ground cover, because that's going to be the biggest factor on how the grass is going to respond. It's how effective your moisture is going to become, and that is all tied up to the 6 soil principles.
Right. You mentioned pioneer species and talking about succession of plant species. Is it true, or would you say that in your experience it's true that when you'll see a pioneer species there 1 year and it's kind of done its job, and then the next year you might not have a perennial there, but you'll have a different pioneer species? Or in the next phase of succession, if it's not happening from year to year, you'll have a different pioneer species there. Is that kind of how you've experienced it?
Yes, I'll put it in context. Instead of pioneer species, how about on invasive species? Because there's always a lot of interest in those. I see it the same way. You cannot skip soil succession without taking into consideration biodiversity succession of all species involved in the process. So your soil microbiome, and as well as your plant species. So your perennial species, being weeds, brush, and some annual grasses, they will be the first ones to establish. And they're really, they can be very productive Um, in our situation, in brittle environments, you won't see many of those during times of drought. Only your perennial grasses will be able to perform. Um, as the soil improves, the more biodiversity you get, and that's when things start getting really interesting. I don't think that each year is the same. You could see range conditions be appropriate for certain species to really flourish during a time, but in brittle environments, those times are few and counted and far apart. And sooner or later, you're going to be hit by a 2 or 3 year drought. And during those times, you'll see your native species take back some of the ground that they lost to invasive species. My best example for those two here in my context, it will be buffalo grass and Bermuda grass, coastal grass. They cannot withstand a 3-year, 2-inch drought in our environment. But toboso, a native species, and alkali sakatone, another native species, those two grasses can. So during that time, they regain some of the ground. So in the end, the more diversity you have in your pastures, even if it's the things that you deem indesirable or invasive, they serve a purpose, and that's to cover the ground. And I use those sources as a nutrition source for my cattle on my grazing management. So you definitely have to take advantage of those if you want to have good animal performance.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate that perspective. That's helpful. That, every year isn't going to be right for every plant. So sometimes the year is going to cause different plants to express themselves. But as the soil gets more healthy, you'll have more of the natives and more of the perennials and more of the resilient plants that are there. And so, yeah, I think that's very helpful. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work with Understanding Ag and some of the consulting that you're doing. And, I always like to talk about the value of seeing other parts of the country or other parts of the world, as far as just what you can learn from somebody else on their place in, context that's different from your own. So if you could just talk to me a little bit about some of those things, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I think moving with Understanding Ag was an amazing career choice. It has given me the opportunity to meet awesome producers throughout the United States, and they shared with me some of the practices that they implement that are really successful. And I was just really pleased to know that these principles worked in environments that I wasn't as familiar with to start with 6 years ago. But now I do, and I've had my share of success in some irrigated prairies, in high altitude settings. In the Southwest, well, it's pretty much the same. I find the same grass species here in Chihuahua, all the way to Colorado and including parts of Montana and Wyoming. So it's reassuring to see pieces of home, even when I'm very far away. I'd say it works the same way. The principles are universal. You guys have a bit more cool season grasses and depend on spring moisture a lot more than we do down here in Mexico. And I guess the greatest challenge that I see most producers is balancing their multi-species component in their pastures. I see them struggling with giving sufficient recovery. I think that the idea of giving a full season rest to a pasture here in the United States, it's a lot more difficult to accept and embrace than down here, where our moisture distribution just doesn't allow for anything else, really. You kind of have to just wait it out a whole year. But there's definitely a lot of great potential that most producers have in the United States. I think they're starting to realize the power of adaptive grazing and the regenerative principles. We have a lot of good success and feedback with our clients. I've seen producers eliminate hay costs and increase their grazing season significantly. Some go somehow decrease the hay they feed almost completely when they stockpile and keep their house out of the corrals for as long as possible during the winter. And some of my work is just helping producers with their water infrastructure and fencing, as well as with their stockmanship, to set up their outfits to run more effectively, how to incorporate cattle into their operations in a way that it will give out a profit at the end of the year, and have a clear vision of how they want to develop their ranches so that they become productive. I think that's one of the most satisfying jobs anyone could ask for, is just helping other people out, I guess.
Yeah, Fernando, very good. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you, Clay.
Of course, very good stuff, goes without saying. There's a list of people that should be talked to more frequently than I'm able to get around to them. So always, as I say, welcoming more cow-focused regenerative agriculture podcasts to the playing field, and there's still room for more of them, but really appreciate Understanding Ag and Fernando for facilitating that, setting it up, and just delivering a lot of value. So really looking forward to continuing that relationship. We are planning to take July off from bonus episodes with Understanding Ag, but we'll come back in August and be delivering some more Friday episodes there. But looking forward to next week on the Working Cows podcast. We do intend to continue to release episodes every week through July, just not Friday bonus episodes with Understanding Ag through July. But next week, just in a couple of days from when this releases, got an episode coming out with Natalie Kavorik and Tara Vanderdusen of the Discover Ag podcast, and both of them are doing some really good work there, producing a really high quality show and just talking about the kind of big headline topics each week in agriculture. And I want to talk to them a little bit about how we maintain this relationship in agriculture between regenerative agriculture and whatever other label you want to use, conventional agriculture or whatever other label we want to use, and some of the things that we should consider as far as that relationship is concerned going forward. So we'll see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.